What's a cruise without stops in port? Hi, I'm Tanner from Cruzely.com, and your trip will likely feature multiple stops in ports where you are free to go out and enjoy yourself. But there are some things that you absolutely never want to do, whether it be for safety reasons, to avoid breaking the law, or simply to have a better trip. I'll tell you what to avoid right now. Before I get started, I just want to let you know that Cruzely is almost to 100,000 subscribers. So if you enjoyed this video, then I hope that you'll sign up and help us reach that goal. Now, let's start with what I think is the most basic thing never to do in port, and that is to think that you're still on the ship. If you're visiting a port of call that's not a private destination, then the cruise line, they have nothing to do with everything that's off of the ship. These ports you're visiting, they are real places. Don't think that you're still on the cruise ship where everything is largely sanitized for tourists. You're under the laws of that country that you're visiting. The people there, they have no affiliation with the cruise line, and there's no guest services that you can complain to if things go wrong. Now, this doesn't mean that you're in danger or that you have to worry while you're ashore, but it's important that you understand things will be different in port than the perfect atmosphere that is created with being on the cruise ship. When you head to port, the cruise line, they will remind you several times that you need a couple of things: your room key card and your photo ID. If you're headed to the Caribbean, this ID can be your driver's license if you're 16 or older. It doesn't have to be your passport. But while you can't leave your ship without your key card since it's scanned when you leave, it's much easier to walk off the ship without your ID. Then when you return to the ship, this is often checked at the pier against your key card to make sure that you're supposed to be getting on board. I'm not sure what happens if you forget your ID, but I also know that you don't want to find out. Are you booked on a shore excursion in port? If so, one thing you never want to do is to forget to bring the ticket with you into port that day. Think of it as the third item to bring along with your key card and your photo ID. When you book your excursion on the ship, you'll be printed tickets to take with you. If you booked it online ahead of the cruise, then the tickets are delivered to your stateroom well in advance of that day in port. You'll then need to bring these with you into port on the day of your tour. If you forget, it's a long walk back to the ship to grab them. Now, I've talked a bit about what to never forget to bring into port, but what about something that you should never bring in with you? Lots of people have an idea of grabbing a little something from the buffet to take with them for the day. I'm talking about an apple or a banana to have something in the middle of the morning when you're out and about. But just like when you get off the ship at home, it's against the law to bring certain food items ashore, namely fresh items like fruits or vegetables. In fact, at least in Cozumel, they even have agricultural sniffer dogs that will smell passengers to hunt out those bringing food ashore. You won't be arrested or anything, but just leave the food on the ship. It seems these days, any port you visit in the Caribbean is designed to keep you from going out. The ports, they build these big welcome areas that are literally fenced in with typically only a single entrance and exit into the port town itself. These port areas, they are made for cruise passengers. You'll find all sorts of restaurants and bars, there's lots of souvenirs, and there's vendors that are hawking their tours. What you won't find is much authenticity. Now, I know some people just want to visit a warm place where they can have a cold drink, but ports are real places, and I think you're doing a disservice if you don't get out and explore a little bit. Yes, even outside of the port, they are still largely built for tourists, but they're definitely more interesting than the artificial world created at the port just outside the ship. Now, at the risk of sounding like an old man, I've noticed over the years that people seem more comfortable wearing what I'd call offensive clothing. Now, I'm not talking about swimsuits getting smaller or anything like that. I'm talking about clothing that features the F word on it, or super aggressive language, or even the one guy I saw with a shirt that said "Dad in the streets, Daddy in the sheets." My suggestion is to leave this stuff on the ship, or even at home, frankly. Of course, nothing is going to happen to you if you do wear things like this in the port. You won't be arrested or made to return to the ship. But remember, you are a visitor to the port and there are lots of other people around. You should go and enjoy yourself, but there's no reason to potentially offend other passengers or locals with stuff that's considered impolite in public. When you cruise, it's well known that once the ship leaves home, you want to put your phone into airplane mode. That way you don't have it accidentally connect to foreign towers and charge you sky-high roaming fees. It's the same thing when you actually reach a foreign port of call. First, the good news. These days, more and more cell phone plans are including international service with them. There are many out there, for example, that allow you to use your phone in Canada or Mexico, just as you would in the United States. But other countries, specifically smaller ones, may not be included on these plans. Just about every carrier, however, will have some sort of cruise ship or international plan that you can purchase to use your phone in a foreign country when you visit. Or you can simply use the ship's Wi-Fi, keep your phone in airplane mode, and just go without service for a few hours as you are in port and off of the ship. If you asked 100 cruise passengers about one thing you should never do when you visit a port, well, I'd guess that about 99 of them would tell you the most important thing. Never come back late to the ship. Of course, that is unless you like the feeling of seeing the ship sail off without you as you stand on the pier. Cruise ships let passengers know clearly the all-aboard time before people leave the ship. This isn't a suggestion. With schedules to keep, ships need to depart on time to reach the next port overnight, and ruining the schedule for thousands of people on the ship because a few people didn't make it back in time just isn't the case. Now, if the all-aboard time is 5 p.m. and you make it back to the ship at 5:01, then no, you won't see the ship sailing away without you. But don't even risk it. People do get left, and it is a major pain and hassle to have to figure out the logistics of getting home on your own from a foreign port. Of course, when you're in a port of call, the excitement is all about that port that you're visiting. It's fun to get out and explore, and honestly, by the time you reach the port, you are usually ready to get off the ship and stretch your legs a little bit. But I would suggest that if you're at a port of call, including maybe one that you've visited before, you don't want to forget about the ship in that case. That's because the atmosphere is completely different on the ship when it is in port. During a day at sea, there are people everywhere. There's lots going on, it's busy and it's crowded and it's buzzing. A day in port is the complete opposite. Venues are still open so you can eat in restaurants or lounge by the pool, but the pace is much slower and there are far fewer people. If you're wanting to relax, it's hard to beat the ship when it is in port. I wouldn't skip the port altogether, but if you have been there before, don't forget about the option just hanging out on the ship. This tip ties into a point I made earlier about not thinking you're still on the ship when you're in port, but it's something that does need to be made clear. I will never forget the first time I visited Nassau. My wife and I are sitting on this gorgeous beach when a lone woman goes for a jet ski ride with one of the random guys driving up and down the shore offering rentals. About 20 minutes later, she comes back with another woman now on the jet ski. The two women, they jump off, they storm off the beach with one turning around and loudly yelling in front of everybody at this driver that his friend tried to sexually assault the second woman that is now on the ride. That's why you never want to lose your common sense in ports. Ports, they are fairly safe, but you don't want to do things that defy logic. So you don't flash tons of cash or jewelry. If you wander into a neighborhood that doesn't feel right, just turn around. And if a situation doesn't pass the smell test, then just use common sense. Again, I'm talking about a small portion of passengers who visit a port and have a bad time, but nobody wants to have a bad day when a little common sense will go a long way. Thank you for watching, and before I go, I want to know what your favorite tips are for visiting in a port. Be sure to put them in the comments below to help your other cruisers. As well, you can always find everything about cruising, including port guides, at Cruzely.com. If you like this video, I hope you'll subscribe, and until next time, happy sailing.